They called her Ash. It was not a name given in love, but in spite. A name for the girl who slept by the cold hearth, who was always smudged with soot, who was as disposable as the cinders she swept away each morning. Her real name was a whisper, lost to memory, a ghost of a life before she was an orphan, before she was the Pax Omega, before she was nothing. The cold was a living thing in the northern ridge. It seeped through the thin wool of her tunic, a garment patched so many times it was more thread than fabric. It bit at her fingers, turning them a mottled red and blue as she gripped the handle of the axe. Each swing was a monumental effort. Her arms screamed, her shoulders burned, and the jarring impact vibrated up to her teeth. The wood was defiant, frozen solid. But the great hall needed fuel, and she was the one to provide it. Always her. A gust of wind, sharp as a wolf's claw, tore at her hood, exposing her face to the biting air. Her cheeks were raw, chapped from the relentless assault of winter. She gritted her teeth, ignoring the stinging pain, and raised the axe again. The world was a canvas of white and gray. White snow, gray sky, gray trees stripped bare by the season. It was a reflection of her own soul, she often thought, bleached of color, of warmth, of life. A pang of hunger twisted in her gut, a familiar gnawing ache. Breakfast had been a crust of stale bread she had gnawed on while fetching water from the half-frozen well. Dinner would be whatever scraps were left after the pack had eaten their fill. If she was lucky. Look at it. A voice sneered from behind her. Alara flinched, her grip tightening on the axe. She did not need to turn to know who it was. Lyra, daughter of the Pax Beta, beautiful and cruel as a winter frost. Still swinging that thing like a newborn pup trying to walk, Lyra continued, her laughter like the crackle of ice. Two other girls, Lyra's ever-present shadows, giggled in chorus. Alara kept her back to them, focusing on the stubborn log. Showing weakness was an invitation for more torment. "What's the matter, Ash?" Lyra purred, stepping closer. The scent of pine and clean wool from her expensive cloak filled the air, a stark contrast to Alara's own smell of soot and sweat. "Cat got your tongue? Or did you swallow too much smoke this morning?" Alara swung the axe. It bit into the wood with a satisfying crack, but did not split it. "Ignoring your betters now? That's a new level of pathetic, even for you." A hand shoved her shoulder. Hard. Alara stumbled, her worn boots slipping on a patch of ice hidden beneath the fresh snow. She went down, landing painfully on her hip. The axe flew from her grasp, skittering away into a snowdrift. Laughter erupted, sharp and piercing in the frozen silence of the woods. "Clumsy as a dead thing," one of the girls cackled. Alara pushed herself up, her face burning with a humiliation that was hotter than any fire. Snow clung to her tunic, melting instantly and sending a fresh wave of icy cold against her skin. Lyra stood over her, a perfect picture of pack royalty. Her hair was a cascade of shining black against the fur-lined hood of her cloak, her eyes a piercing blue, her smile a slash of predatory triumph. "You're a disgrace, Ash," Lyra said, her voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. "An Omega who can't even chop wood. Worthless. My father should have let you freeze when they found you." The words were not new. Alara had heard them, or variations of them, 1,000 times, but they still found their mark. Each one was a fresh cut on a heart already riddled with scars. She was worthless, invisible, a burden. She knew it. But a tiny, stubborn ember of defiance still glowed deep within her. It was the only thing that had kept her from simply lying down in the snow and letting the cold take her years ago. She pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet, refusing to look at Lyra. Her gaze was fixed on the lost axe. "Get out of my way," Alara whispered, her voice hoarse. Lyra's eyes widened in mock surprise. "What did you say?" "I have to finish my work," Alara said, a little louder this time, her chin lifting an inch. For a moment, Lyra looked genuinely shocked. Then her expression hardened into pure malice. "Work?" she spat. "You think this is important?" She kicked a pile of the wood Alara had managed to split, sending the pieces scattering across the clearing. "This is nothing. You are nothing." Lyra took a step closer, her face inches from Alara's. "Remember your place, Ash. You are here on our charity. You eat our scraps. You live because we allow it. Don't you ever forget that." With a final contemptuous shove, Lyra and her friends turned and walked away, their laughter trailing behind them like a poison cloud. Alara stood trembling, not from the cold, but from the effort of holding herself together. She did not cry. Tears were a luxury she could not afford. They would only freeze on her face. Instead, she took a deep, shuddering breath. The air burned her lungs. Slowly, methodically, she began to gather the scattered pieces of wood. She retrieved the axe from the snowdrift, its metal handle a shock of absolute cold against her bare hand. She placed the stubborn log back on the chopping block. She would not break. She would not give them the satisfaction. She would endure. It was all she knew how to do. She swung the axe again and again, pouring every ounce of her frustration, her humiliation, her quiet, desperate rage into the motion. The log finally split with a loud crack, falling into two perfect halves. A small, grim victory. It was enough. For now. By late afternoon, the sky had changed. The flat, oppressive gray had deepened into a bruised purple, and the wind had taken on a new, keening howl. The older pack members sniffed the air, their faces grim. "Soul Eater," one of the elders muttered, his words sending a fresh chill down Alara's spine. A soul eater was a blizzard of unnatural ferocity, a storm that was said to be born of dark magic, so cold and so violent it could steal the breath from your lungs and freeze the soul in your body. They were rare, and they were lethal. The Pax Alpha ordered everyone indoors. The great wooden shutters were barred, extra logs were piled on the fires, and the mood in the great hall grew tense. Alara was in the middle of hauling the last of the wood inside when Lyra's father, the Beta, stopped her. He was a hard man, with eyes as cold as his daughter's. "The kindling stores for the East Wing are low," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "The wood you brought is for the main hall. Go to the outer shed and bring back 3 baskets." Alara stared at him, her heart sinking. "But the storm," she stammered. The wind was already a physical force, pushing against the heavy oak door. "The shed is not far," he said dismissively, "and the Alphas in the East Wing will need their fires. Are you refusing an order, Omega?" The title was a slap, a reminder. No, she could not refuse. "No, sir," she whispered, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Then go, and be quick about it." He turned his back on her before she could say another word. Pulling her thin hood up, Alara slipped out the side door into the teeth of the storm. The world had vanished. It was a whirlwind of white. Snow flew horizontally, stinging her eyes and stealing her breath. The path to the shed, usually a clear track, was already gone, buried under a churning sea of white. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her resignation. This was not a normal storm. This was a death sentence. She bent her head, leaning into the wind, and forced one foot in front of the other. The shed couldn't be more than 100 yards away. She could make it. She had to. The wind howled like a great beast, mocking her. Every step was a battle. The snow was already knee-deep, and with every gust it seemed to grow deeper, pulling at her, trying to drag her down. Her sense of direction vanished in the blinding chaos. Was she still going the right way? She could no longer see the great hall behind her. She could see nothing but the swirling vortex of snow. Fear was a frozen knot in her chest. She called out, a desperate, thin cry for help. The wind snatched the sound from her lips and tore it to shreds. She was alone, completely and utterly alone. She stumbled, her foot catching on a hidden root or rock. This time she did not have the strength to catch herself. She fell face first into the deep, suffocating snow. It was soft and so cold. It filled her mouth, her nose. For a moment she struggled, flailing against the weight of it, but her limbs were heavy, numb. The fight began to seep out of her. It would be so easy to just stop, to let the cold take her, to let the white silence swallow her up. No more hunger, no more pain, no more Lyra, no more worthlessness, just peace. But as the darkness began to creep in at the edges of her vision, that stubborn little ember inside her flared. No, not like this. Not because they sent her out to die. With a final desperate surge of will, she pushed herself up, gasping, spitting out snow. She was on a slope she hadn't realized was there. The ground beneath her was unstable. With a low groan, the snowdrift she was on gave way. She was falling, tumbling down a steep, wooded embankment, over and over, snow and ice and darkness her entire world. She cried out as her head struck something hard, a flash of white-hot pain, and then nothing. Silence. Stillness. Pain was the first thing to return, a dull, throbbing agony at the back of her skull. Then the cold, a deep, penetrating chill that seemed to have sunk into her very bones. Alara groaned, her eyelids fluttering open. She was at the bottom of a ravine, sheltered from the worst of the wind by a thick overhang of rock. The blizzard still raged above, but down here, it was strangely quiet. She was half buried in snow, her body a constellation of aches and bruises. She tried to move, to sit up, but a fresh wave of dizziness washed over her. It was then that she heard it, a low growl, vibrating through the ground. Her blood ran cold. Wolf. Slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs, she turned her head. Not 20 feet away, half hidden in the shadows of the rock overhang, was a wolf. It was enormous, bigger than any wolf she had ever seen, bigger than the pack's own alpha. Its fur was the color of silver, stark against the gloom, and it was in trouble. Its front paw was caught in the cruel, rusted jaws of a hunter's trap, the heavy chain bolted to the rock face. Blood, dark and stark against the white snow, stained the fur around the wound. But it was the eyes that held her captive. They were not the eyes of a normal animal. They glowed with a faint internal light, the color of molten gold, and they were fixed on her. The growl rumbled again, deeper this time, a warning. Fear was a primal, screaming thing in her mind. Every instinct told her to run, to crawl away, to hide. A wolf that large, injured and trapped, was the most dangerous thing in the forest. but she didn't move. She saw the pain in those glowing eyes. She saw the desperation, and in that moment she saw a reflection of herself, trapped, hurting, alone. The ember of defiance became a flicker of something else. Compassion. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. The wolf's ears flattened, its lips pulling back to reveal a formidable set of teeth. "I'm not going to hurt you." Slowly, wincing at the protest of her bruised body, she began to push herself up. The wolf watched her every move, its golden eyes narrowed, a low snarl building in its chest. "I want to help," she said, holding her hands out, showing they were empty. She took a slow, shuffling step forward. The snarl intensified. She stopped. Her own situation was dire. She was injured, lost, and freezing to death. Helping this creature was madness. It would tear her throat out, and yet, she couldn't leave it. She couldn't turn her back on another creature's suffering. It was not in her nature. "Please," she whispered, her plea aimed as much at the wolf as it was at the uncaring gods. "Let me help." She took another step, and another. The wolf remained tense, its muscles coiled like springs. But it did not lunge. It just watched her, its gaze intense, intelligent, as if it was judging her, weighing her soul. When she was only a few feet away, she sank to her knees in the snow, her movements slow and deliberate. The trap was a brutal, archaic thing. The metal teeth had bitten deep into the wolf's leg. It must be in agony. "This is going to hurt," she murmured, more to herself than to the wolf. She reached out a trembling hand, not for the trap, but for the wolf itself. She needed to calm it. To show it she meant no harm. Her frozen fingers made contact with the thick silver fur of its shoulder. The moment her skin touched its fur, the world exploded. A bolt of pure energy, white-hot and blinding, shot up her arm. It was not a fire that burned, but a light that consumed. It slammed into her chest, stealing the air from her lungs, making her heart stutter and stop. The wolf threw its head back and let out a howl that was not a sound of pain, but of pure, shocking power. The golden glow in its eyes erupted, becoming two miniature suns. Alara cried out, her own body arching in a spasm of overwhelming sensation. It was pain and pleasure, ice and fire, life and death all at once. She felt a searing heat on her collarbone, as if a brand was being pressed into her skin. She could feel the wolf's life force, ancient and immense, pouring into her, and her own small, flickering essence flowing back into it. A connection, instantaneous and absolute, was forged between them. A bond. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Alara collapsed forward, her head spinning, her body trembling uncontrollably. The ravine was filled with a blinding golden light that pulsed from the wolf. She watched in stunned, terrified awe as the creature's form began to shift and change. Bones cracked and reformed, fur receded. The massive lupine shape melted away, replaced by the form of a man. He was kneeling in the snow where the wolf had been, naked despite the impossible cold. His body was a masterpiece of lethal grace. Broad shoulders, a chest and arms corded with muscle, skin pale as moonlight but radiating an impossible heat. His hair was long, the color of silver, falling around a face that was harsh and beautiful, all sharp angles and predatory elegance. And his eyes. His eyes were the same molten gold, glowing with power and an emotion she could not name. He looked at her, and the world seemed to stop. The blizzard, the cold, the pain in her head, it all faded into nothing. There was only him. He raised a hand, his fingers long and powerful, and gently brushed a strand of snow-caked hair from her face. His touch was fire against her frozen skin. "You," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through her very bones. It was not a question. It was a statement, a declaration. "You're her." Alara could only stare, her mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. What was happening? Who was this man? What had he done to her? The searing pain on her collarbone had subsided to a warm thrum. She glanced down. There, against the pale skin just above the neckline of her tunic, was a mark. It was a delicate, intricate spiral, glowing with a soft golden light like a tiny captured star. A claiming mark. Her breath hitched. She knew the stories, the old legends the pack elders sometimes told to frighten the pups. Tales of fated mates, of soul bonds so powerful they left a physical mark. But those were just stories, weren't they? The man's golden eyes followed her gaze to the mark. A look of profound, soul-deep satisfaction crossed his features. "Mine," he whispered. The word an oath, a promise, a chain. He shifted his weight, and for the first time, Alara saw that the rusted trap was still clamped shut, but now it was around a human ankle. Blood welled from the wound, a shocking crimson against his pale skin. He seemed not to notice the pain. His entire focus was on her. "I have been waiting for you," he said, his voice softer now, laced with a wonder that seemed to shake him to his core. "For centuries." Centuries. The word barely registered. Her mind was reeling. This was impossible. A dream. A hallucination brought on by the cold and the blow to her head. What are you?" she managed to ask, her voice a trembling whisper. A faint smile touched his lips. It did not soften the harsh beauty of his face, but it held a warmth that reached across the space between them and touched her shivering soul. "I am Kale," he said, "and you, little star, are my queen." Queen! The word was so absurd, so fantastical, that a choked, hysterical laugh almost escaped her. Her? Ash? The worthless Omega? A queen? It was the cruelest joke of all. "I don't understand," she said, shaking her head, trying to clear the fog. "I'm nobody." Kale's smile vanished. His expression became fierce, possessive. "You are everything," he growled, the sound vibrating with an ancient power that made the air hum. He reached for the trap on his ankle. With a grunt of effort, he gripped the metal jaws with his bare hands. Muscles in his arms and back bulged. With a screech of protesting metal, he tore the trap apart, bending the thick, rusted steel as if it were soft clay. He tossed the ruined pieces aside, his gaze never leaving her face. He was the Alpha King, the supreme leader of all the shifter packs, a figure of myth and legend so powerful that no one had challenged his rule in 500 years. And she, a nameless, forgotten girl, was his fated mate. The thought was too big, too overwhelming to comprehend. Kale rose to his feet, a towering, magnificent figure in the falling snow. He did not seem to feel the cold. He took a step toward her. Alara flinched back, scrambling away until her back hit the cold, hard rock of the ravine wall. Her body screamed with a primal, instinctual pull toward him, a deep-seated need to be near him, to touch him. But her mind, conditioned by years of abuse and fear, screamed louder. He was powerful. He was male. And powerful males were dangerous. They hurt. They used. They discarded. Seeing her fear, Cale stopped. A flicker of pain crossed his face, so raw and genuine it startled her. It was the look of a man who had been lonely for a very, very long time. "I will not hurt you," he said, his voice soft but absolute. "Ever." He held out his hand. "You are freezing. Let me help you." She hesitated, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Could she trust him? Could she trust this impossible situation? But then she looked at her own hands, already stiff and blue with cold. She looked at the swirling snow at the top of the ravine. She would die here without him. That was a certainty. With him, she did not know what would happen, but it was a chance. A desperate, terrifying hope began to bloom in the barren wasteland of her heart. Slowly, her hand trembling, she reached out and placed her fingers in his palm. His heat was instantaneous, a wave of life and warmth that flowed up her arm, chasing the deathly chill from her limbs. His fingers closed around hers, strong and gentle. "I have you," he murmured. And in those 3 words, she felt a sense of safety she had never known in her entire life. He drew her to her feet, his movements effortless. Without a word, he shrugged out of his own. No, he had no cloak. He simply pulled her against his bare chest, wrapping his arms around her. The heat from his body was like a furnace. It soaked through her wet, frozen clothes, sinking deep into her skin, her muscles, her bones. It was overwhelming, intoxicating. She should have been terrified, pressed against a naked stranger, a powerful predator. Instead, for the first time she could remember, she felt safe. She buried her face in the curve of his neck and shoulder, inhaling his scent. It was the smell of winter storms and pine forests and clean, cold air. The smell of home, a place she had never had. Unseen, high above on the ridge, a pair of eyes watched the glow from the ravine fade. Lyra had followed the Omega's tracks, not out of concern, but out of a spiteful curiosity. She wanted to see the worthless girl freeze. But she had seen something else entirely, a flash of impossible light, and then a glimpse of the man. She had not seen his face clearly, but she had seen the way he held the Omega, the possessiveness, the reverence, and she had seen, for a brief moment before the girl buried her face, the golden mark glowing on her skin. A cold, venomous jealousy, far more potent than her usual contempt, coiled in Lyra's stomach. That should have been her. A powerful, unknown shifter, drawn by the storm. He should have found her, the beautiful, high-ranking daughter of the Beta, not Ash. Rage made her reckless. She scrambled back from the edge of the ravine, her mind racing. This changed everything. That mark meant power. It meant status. It meant the worthless Omega was suddenly worth something. And Lyra could not bear that. She turned and ran, not back to the Great Hall, but east, toward the shadowed peaks that marked the border of their territory. There were whispers, forbidden stories of a different power in those mountains. A shadow king who promised strength to those who were ambitious enough to seek it. A cult known as the Ember Covenant, who paid handsomely for information about their rivals, especially information about the Supreme Alpha, Cale, and any potential weaknesses he might have. Lyra smiled, a cruel, sharp thing in the howling wind. She had just found the Alpha King's greatest weakness, and she was going to sell it. Cale led her to a small, hidden cave behind a curtain of frozen ivy. Inside, it was dry and sheltered. With a wave of his hand, a pile of dry leaves and twigs in the center of the cave burst into flame. Magic. Alara watched, wide-eyed as he moved. He was all fluid grace and coiled power. He gestured for her to sit by the fire. "Your clothes are wet. You will get sick," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He found a dry, heavy fur pelt tucked away in a corner of the cave, a survival cache. He held it out to her. The implication was clear. Her face flushed with heat that had nothing to do with the fire. She had never been naked in front of anyone, but the chill was returning to her bones, and the thought of putting on a warm, dry fur was too tempting. Sensing her hesitation, Cale turned his back to her, giving her privacy as he tended to the wound on his ankle. With trembling fingers, Alara stripped off her wretched, frozen clothes, leaving them in a damp pile on the cave floor. She wrapped the fur around her. It was heavy and blissfully warm, smelling of wolf and leather. "Sit down," he commanded softly, his back still to her. She obeyed, huddling close to the fire, pulling the fur tight around her. The warmth was exquisite. He turned back, his golden eyes scanning her, ensuring she was warm enough. The raw wound on his ankle was already closing, the skin knitting itself back together as she watched. More magic. "What is this?" she asked, her voice small, touching the glowing mark on her collarbone. "What did you do to me?" "I did nothing," he said, his voice deep and serious. "This is what we did to each other. It is the bond. The fates have woven our souls together, and our first touch has merely revealed the pattern." "The fates?" she repeated, the word tasting strange on her tongue. "You are my mate, Alara," he said, and the sound of her true name, a name she had not heard in a decade, spoken in his voice, was a shock to her system. How did he know her name? "I have always known your name," he answered her unspoken question, his eyes softening. "I have felt you, a distant star I could not reach. I felt your loneliness, your pain. I have searched for you my entire life." Tears welled in her eyes, tears of confusion, of disbelief, of a fragile, terrifying hope. "Why me?" she choked out. I'm nothing. They call me Ash. I'm an Omega. I'm worthless." The air in the cave crackled with sudden, dangerous energy. The fire leaped higher. Cale's face was a mask of cold fury. "Never," he snarled, the sound ripping from his chest. "Never say that again." He crossed the small cave in a single stride, kneeling before her. He took her face in his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. "They were blind," he said, his voice a low, fierce whisper. "They were fools. You are not worthless. You are the other half of my soul. You are my queen." He leaned in and pressed his forehead against hers. The connection between them flared, a silent communication of pure emotion. She felt his loneliness, a vast, echoing chasm of centuries spent alone. She felt his fierce, overwhelming protectiveness of her, and she felt his love. It was a tidal wave of devotion, so powerful and absolute it terrified her. How could anyone feel this for her? It was too much. She pulled back, breaking the contact, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "This is a mistake." The pain in his eyes returned, sharp and deep. "It is not a mistake," he said quietly. "It is destiny. You are just afraid, and you have every right to be. Your life has taught you to fear." He did not push. He simply retreated, giving her space. "Rest," he said. "When the storm breaks, I will take you home." Home. The word echoed in the silent cave. What did that even mean? The next 2 days passed in a strange, dreamlike haze. The blizzard raged, trapping them in their small sanctuary. Kale hunted, vanishing into the storm for short periods and returning with fresh kills which he cooked for her over the fire. He talked to her, telling her of his kingdom in the far north, a land of silver mountains and glowing forests. He told her of his people, of his long wait. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply was, a constant, warm, powerful presence at her side. And slowly, minute by minute, hour by hour, the terror in Alara's heart began to recede. It was replaced by a fragile sense of wonder. She found herself watching him, the way he moved, the way the firelight played on the sharp planes of his face, the way his golden eyes would find hers across the flames. Her body knew him. Her soul recognized him. It was only her mind, scarred and frightened, that held back. On the third morning, they awoke to silence. The storm had broken. Sunlight, brilliant and white off the fresh snow, streamed into the mouth of the cave. "It is time," Kale said. He was going to take her away from the northern ridge pack, away from Lyra, away from a life of servitude and misery. A thrill of hope, so sharp it was almost painful, shot through her. A new life, a chance. Kale was gathering their few things when he suddenly went still. His head snapped up, his nostrils flaring. "What is it?" Alara asked, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. "We are not alone," he growled, his golden eyes darkening to a dangerous amber. He moved to the mouth of the cave, placing himself in front of her. Figures emerged from the trees, their black cloaks a stark, ugly slash against the pristine white snow. There were at least a dozen of them. They moved with a silent, unnatural grace. And they smelled wrong. They smelled of ash and rot and dark, twisted magic. The Ember Covenant. The leader stepped forward. He was tall and gaunt, his face hidden in the shadows of a deep hood. But Alara could feel the malevolent power radiating from him. "Kale," the man said, his voice a dry, rasping whisper. "The Shadow King sends his regards. He has been looking for you." "Vorlag," Kale spat, his body tensing, coiling for a fight. "You have no power here. Leave now, and I may let you live." The hooded man, Vorlag, let out a dry chuckle. "Oh, I think not. You see, we were not looking for you. Not really." His gaze slid past Kael, landing on Alara. Even hidden in the shadows of the cave, she felt his eyes on her like a physical violation. "We were looking for her," Vorlag rasped. "A little bird told us your long search was finally over. She told us you had found your one weakness." A cold dread washed over Alara. Lyra. This was her doing. "You will not touch her!" Kael roared, and the power that exploded from him was terrifying. The very air vibrated. The snow at his feet melted away in a perfect circle. But Vorlag only laughed. "We don't need to touch her," he said. From beneath their cloaks, his followers produced heavy chains, not of iron, but of a dull, sickly-looking silver. "We came prepared," Vorlag said. Kael launched himself from the cave, a blur of silver-haired fury. He moved faster than the human eye could follow, a whirlwind of claws and teeth and raw power. The first 2 Covenant members fell, their black cloaks unable to save them, but the others were ready. They threw the silver chains like nets. The moment the metal touched Kael's skin, he cried out, a sound of pure agony. Smoke rose from the points of contact, and the golden light in his eyes flickered violently. Silver, the shifter's bane. It didn't just burn them. It severed their connection to their magic, to their very essence. He fought, his strength still immense. He shattered chains, threw bodies aside, but there were too many of them. They tangled his legs, his arms. They dragged him down into the snow, wrapping him in the burning, power-dampening metal. "Kale!" Alara screamed, her voice raw with terror. She scrambled from the cave, heedless of her own safety. Two of the black-cloaked figures intercepted her. She fought, kicking and scratching, but she was no match for them. They grabbed her arms, their touch cold and dead even through the thick fur. Vorlag walked calmly through the carnage, stopping to look down at the bound and kneeling Kale. "The mighty Alpha King," he sneered, "brought low by a few trinkets. And by love. How pathetic." Kale strained against his bonds, his face a mask of hate, his eyes fixed on Alara. "If you harm her," he choked out, his voice raw with pain, "I will unmake your entire world." "Oh, I have no intention of harming her," Vorlag said smoothly, turning to face Alara. "She is far too valuable. She is the key." He reached out and traced the glowing mark on her collarbone with a cold, dry finger. Alara flinched away, a wave of nausea washing over her. His touch was vile. It felt like death. "A soul bond," Vorlag mused. "So rare, so powerful, and so very, very easy to corrupt. Or to sever." He smiled, a reptilian curving of his thin lips. "We will take her to the obsidian spire. There, we will perform the rite. We will cut your soul from hers, Kale, and we will pour all that power, all that life force, into our master. He will become a god, and you will be left a hollow, broken thing." "No!" Alara cried, struggling against her captors. "Take them," Vorlag commanded. "Keep them separate. The distance will weaken the bond. It will make the ritual easier." They dragged her away, pulling her toward the dark forest. She fought every step of the way, her eyes locked on Kale. He was still struggling, roaring her name, his voice filled with a desperate, helpless fury. The last thing she saw before they pulled her into the trees was his golden eyes, flickering, dimming, but still fixed on her. Then he was gone, and the fragile hope in her heart shattered into a million pieces. The world became a nightmare of cold and despair. They traveled for days, always moving, always shrouded in the unnatural gloom that seemed to follow the covenant. Alara was thrown into a cage on a crude sledge, the fur pelt her only comfort. The silver chains that bound Kael had a strange, sympathetic effect on her. The bond, once a source of warmth and strength, was now a conduit for pain. She could feel his agony as if it were her own. A dull, constant ache settled deep in her chest, a phantom echo of the silver's burn. The glowing mark on her collarbone flickered, its light growing dimmer with every mile that separated them. It felt like a part of her was being stretched to the breaking point, like her very soul was being torn in two. Finally, they arrived at the obsidian spire. It was a jagged shard of black rock that clawed at the sky, a place of profound darkness and wrongness. The air was thin and cold, and the very stones seemed to drink the light. They dragged her from the cage and threw her into a cell carved from the rock itself. It was small, damp, and utterly dark. A heavy iron door slammed shut, plunging her into absolute blackness. The only thing they left her with was the fur pelt. She curled into a ball on the cold stone floor, pulling the fur around her, trying to find some semblance of the warmth that had meant safety. But it was gone. The scent of kale still clung to it, faint and fading, a torturous reminder of what she had lost. Despair, black and suffocating, washed over her. She was back where she started, alone, powerless, worthless. Vorlag had been right. She was a weakness. Her existence had brought this doom upon the magnificent, powerful being who had called her his queen. He would have been better off if he had never found her. The thought was a blade of ice in her heart. She was a curse. A tear, hot and stinging, finally traced a path through the grime on her cheek. Then another, and another. She wept in the darkness, silent, racking sobs for the hope she had allowed herself to feel, for the safety she had tasted for only a moment, for the magnificent man who was suffering because of her. Time lost all meaning in the dark. Was it hours? Days? They brought her food and water, tasteless gruel and stale water, leaving it just inside the door without a word. The ache in her chest grew worse, a constant, sharp pain. The mark on her skin was now just a dull, cold spot. She felt weak, hollowed out. She was losing him. The bond was fraying. At her lowest point, huddled in the corner, shivering with a cold that came from within, she closed her eyes and did the only thing she could think of. She reached for him. Not with her hands, but with her mind. She focused on the fraying thread of the bond, on the memory of his warmth, on the feel of his soul pressed against hers. She poured all of her will, all of her desperate, fading hope into that single point of connection. Kale. The name was a silent scream in her soul. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just the echoing emptiness. She was about to give up, to let the darkness consume her, when she felt it. A flicker. Faint, distant, but there. A spark of golden warmth in the freezing void. Alara. His voice. Not in her ears, but inside her head. It was weak, strained with pain, but it was him. Tears of relief streamed down her face. "I'm here," she sent back, her own mental voice a trembling whisper. "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." No. The denial was fierce, absolute, even in its weakness. "Not your fault. Mine. I was not careful enough. I let my joy at finding you blind me." She could feel his struggle, the immense effort it took for him to maintain this connection. "They are going to kill you," she wept silently. "They're going to use me to do it." "Listen to me," his voice commanded, gathering strength. "You are not weak. You are not a key. You are a fire they have mistaken for a candle." "Do you remember the moment we touched? The light?" She remembered. The overwhelming, consuming power. "That was not just me, Alara. That was you. Your power, dormant and hidden, answered mine. It is in you, a power of life and light." Her? Power? The idea was ludicrous. "I don't know how," she sent back, her thoughts filled with confusion and despair. "You do not need to know. You only need to feel. It is a part of you. Hold on. Just hold on. I am coming." The connection snapped. The golden warmth vanished, leaving her alone in the cold and dark once more. But something had changed. A tiny seed of possibility had been planted in the barren soil of her despair. I am coming. She clung to those words. She clung to the memory of his strength, his belief in her. She would hold on. The iron door to her cell screeched open. Light, harsh and unwelcome, flooded the small space. Vorlag stood in the doorway, his hooded face a mask of shadow. "It is time," he rasped. They dragged her from the cell, up winding staircases carved into the heart of the mountain. She emerged onto the flat, wind-swept peak of the spire. The sky was a bruised, starless twilight. In the center of the peak, a circle of runes had been carved into the black stone, glowing with a sickly purple light. And in the middle of the circle, he was there. Kale. He was chained to an obsidian altar, bound by a dozen silver chains that sizzled where they touched his skin. His head was bowed, his silver hair matted with sweat and blood. He looked weakened, diminished. But as she appeared, his head snapped up. His eyes, though dimmed, still held their golden fire, and they were locked on her. "Lara," he growled, straining against his bonds, the silver burning him anew. "Bring her," Vorlag commanded. They forced her into the circle, positioning her directly in front of the altar. "The bond is weak, but it holds," Vorlag said, circling them like a vulture. "Perfect. The ritual will be all the more potent when it snaps." He began to chant in a guttural, ancient language. The runes on the floor flared, the purple light intensifying. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over Alara. The pain in her chest became a sharp, tearing agony. She could feel the bond, the beautiful, sacred thing that connected her to Kale, being twisted, corrupted, pulled apart by the dark magic. She cried out, falling to her knees. "Stop!" Kale roared, his voice shaking the very stones. "Take me! Leave her out of this!" "Oh no," Vorlag chuckled. "She is the most important part. She is the vessel through which we will drain you." He placed a cold hand on Alara's head. "The worthless Omega, the forgotten Ash, will be the instrument of the great Alpha King's demise. Isn't it poetic?" His words, meant to break her, had the opposite effect. Worthless. Ash. The old names. The old wounds. But she was not that person anymore. Kale did not see her as worthless. He saw her as his queen. He believed she had power. "You are a fire they have mistaken for a candle." Rage, pure and incandescent, surged through her. A rage born of a lifetime of abuse. A rage for the man she loved, the man they were torturing. A rage for herself. "No," she whispered. "What was that?" Vorlag sneered, leaning closer. "No," she said again, louder, her head lifting. And as she looked at Kale, at his pain, at his fierce, unwavering love for her, something inside her broke. Not the bond, a dam. The power Kale had spoken of, the light she had felt, erupted from her. It was not a flicker, it was a supernova. A wave of pure, blinding, white gold light exploded from her body. It was the light of 1,000 sunrises, the warmth of creation itself. Vorlag screamed as the light hit him, a sound of agony and disbelief. He was thrown backward, his dark magic dissolving like smoke in a hurricane. The Covenant members shrieked as the light washed over them, their shadowy forms incinerating, turning to actual ash on the wind. The purple runes on the floor shattered, the dark magic annihilated. The light, so destructive to the darkness, was the opposite for Kale. It washed over him like a healing tide. Where it touched the silver chains, they did not just melt, they sublimated, turning from solid to gas in an instant, their power-dampening magic utterly negated. The wounds on his skin vanished. The golden fire in his eyes roared back to life, brighter and more powerful than ever before. He shattered the last of his restraints and rose from the altar, his body radiating a power that matched her own. The wave of light subsided, coalescing back into Alara. She stood in the center of the now clear peak, her thin tunic turned to rags by the force of the energy, her body glowing with a soft, residual light. She was breathing heavily, her heart pounding, but she had never felt more alive, more herself. Vorlag staggered to his feet, his cloak singed, his face finally visible. It was a pale, cruel face, contorted with rage and disbelief. "Impossible," he hissed. "An Omega, you have no power." "They called me Ash," Alara said, her voice clear and strong, ringing with an authority she had never known. "They called me worthless." She took a step toward him, and he flinched back. "My name is Alara," she declared, "and you will not touch my king." With a scream of fury, Vorlag lunged, not at her, but at Kale, a shard of obsidian in his hand. He was fast, but Alara was faster. She threw out her hand, and a beam of solid golden light shot from her palm. It struck Vorlag mid-lunge, encasing him in a prison of shimmering energy. He was frozen, his face a mask of eternal, silent rage. The battle was over. Silence descended on the peak, broken only by the whisper of the wind. Alara stood trembling, the last of the adrenaline fading, leaving her weak and shaky. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, pulling her back against a solid, warm chest. Kale. He buried his face in her hair, his whole body shuddering. "Alara." He breathed her name like a prayer. She leaned back into him, tears of relief, of triumph, of overwhelming love streaming down her face. "I told you," he murmured into her ear, his voice thick with emotion. "I told you that you were a fire." He turned her in his arms, his hands framing her face. His golden eyes blazed with pride, with awe, with a love so profound it stole her breath. "My queen," he said, and there was no hint of fantasy in the title now. It was a fact, a truth. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of desperation or fear. It was a kiss of homecoming, of reverence, of two halves of a soul, finally, completely made whole. The bond between them flared, no longer a thin, frayed thread, but a brilliant, unbreakable hawser of pure light and love. The mark on her collarbone blazed with golden light, and as he kissed her, she felt a surge of her own power, her own will, flow into him. Kale gasped against her lips as a matching mark, a perfect mirror of her own, burned itself into existence over his heart, glowing with the same brilliant light. She had claimed him, just as he had claimed her. The bond was complete. It was a pact of equals. He pulled back, his eyes wide with wonder, his hand covering the new mark on his chest. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face, a smile that was like the sunrise after the longest night. "Come," he said, his voice soft. "Let's go home." He swept her up into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious treasure in the universe. He carried her down from the dark spire and into the clean light of a new day. The journey to his kingdom, the Silver Peaks, was nothing like the nightmare journey with the Covenant. They traveled under open skies, Kale sometimes in his massive silver wolf form with her on his back, sometimes in his human form, never letting her go. When they arrived, it was to a kingdom more beautiful than she could have ever imagined. Mountains of gleaming silver rock scraped a sky of impossible blue. Waterfalls cascaded into crystal-clear lakes. The city itself was built of white stone and living wood, glowing with a soft internal light. And his people, thousands of them, poured out to meet them. They were strong, beautiful, and proud. And as Kale stood before them on the steps of the great palace, with Alara held securely in his arms, a hush fell over the entire assembly. He did not put her down. He held her for all to see. "For 1,000 years our kingdom has had a king," Kale's voice boomed, amplified by his power, echoing across the vast plaza. "For 500 years your king has been incomplete, a soul with a missing half." He looked down at Alara, his gaze so full of love it made her heart ache. "No more," he declared. "Behold Alara, my mate, my heart, the fire that answered my soul." He looked back out at his people, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Behold your queen!" A moment of stunned silence, and then the crowd erupted, a single unified roar of approval, of joy, of acceptance, shook the very mountains. They were not just cheering for their king, they were cheering for her. Alara looked out at the sea of faces, and for the first time in her life, she did not see judgment or contempt. She saw reverence, she saw joy, she saw family. She was no longer Ash, the girl who slept by the hearth. She was no longer the Omega, the worthless, invisible thing. She was Alara, the hidden queen, now found. She was a fire. She was loved. She was home. She turned her face into Kale's chest, her silent tears of joy soaking into his tunic. He held her tighter, a low, contented rumble in his chest. "I have you," he murmured, his promise a shield against all the shadows of the past. And in his arms, surrounded by her people, under the light of her new life, she finally, truly believed it.